Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a discussion about toxic gamer behavior. I wanted to break down some of the different kinds of toxic banter that you can experience in video games and just talk about how they work, what it means, and why someone might do that. So let's just break it down to a really simple starting one. Let's get this scene switch paused here. And we have the amazing program called Microsoft Paint. Maybe some of you have heard of this, but it's very powerful. So we've got degradation. Basically, people talking shit to you. What are some different kinds of degradation that can happen in the video game? Because they feel pretty bad even when it comes from a stranger. They should be like red or something. Yeah, it's a feels bad kind of a thing. Okay, so examples that come to mind here, just off the top of my head, we've got, let's do this one. Font size, let's do this. You're bad, etc. This could also be you're trash, garbage, shitty, etc. You kind of get the idea. So basically just telling the person that they're lower on the skill curve than they should be. But the reason that this insult is not a good one to go with is because bad is always relative to who you're comparing it against. So I'll give you an example. I'm a player who in StarCraft 2 has been Grandmaster for 28 seasons. So compared to your standard player, the standard player against me is going to get destroyed basically every time. But against the top players in the world, I will lose basically every time. And it's not even close. So the best player in the world could look at me and say, you're bad. And from that vantage point, that would be true. But from a different vantage point, the same player could be super good. It just depends on who you're comparing it against. So the comment in and of itself is a really big waste of time. It also isn't specific. And this is one of the main things that I would argue causes toxic gamer behavior to not only be ethically wrong, it is strategically weak to choose to BM them like this. If you're going to tell someone that they're bad, you could have spent that same space to articulate one thing that they could be doing better for your team. So instead of saying you're bad, you could say, we need you to play more defensive. If that person is getting killed a whole bunch, for example. So let's do some BM alternatives here. We'll say this would be a mannered alternative. Nice blue color. Mannered alternatives. Wow. Wait, you can be well-mannered to people on the internet? I know, it seems pretty radical. But I believe that it's possible. So we'll say here, we want to give this person a specific thing to adjust in the match. So instead of saying, wow, you're so fucking bad, you say, we need you to play more defensive, or we need you to focus your spells on this person. We need you to get this item instead. We need you to farm on this side of the map. So we'll give those examples there. You've got like position, items, damage focus, stuff like that. So you should be giving them a specific thing to focus on rather than just general degradation, because this doesn't lead into anything productive for your teammate. And you're actually crippling your own team by just calling them bad. It's a big waste of time. So what are some other kinds of insults? We'll say appearance-based insults. This one is really interesting because it happens a lot of the time with internet people who've never actually seen each other. And you might be like, wait, what? Why would they? Sometimes people are just trying to hurt the other person. And that's just a random way to, let's make this hurtful comment and we'll say that it's about their body composition. So they'll say that they're too skinny or they're too fat. They'll say that they're ugly or something like this, which is a really broad and vague insult. But the reason this works and the reason this is upsetting to people is because everyone, to some extent, feels like they're not perfectly handsome, they're not perfectly beautiful, and there are some things that they might not like about themselves. So appearance-based insults, while it's kind of a shotgun approach to talking shit, it can actually hurt people's feelings because maybe you don't like the shape of your nose. Maybe you don't feel like you're in the best shape right now and you feel kind of bad about yourself. Maybe you don't like this or that feature of yourself. If someone's attacking you in that way, it can actually hit pretty hard and it can hurt. And again, it doesn't give you anything to do in the match to do better. You're just talking shit about how the person looks in a very silly way where you're basically not contributing anything positive to the matchup that's going to help you win. So even purely selfishly as a player, you're in a team game. If you're going to be yelling in voice comms, you should yell about something that they can work toward that's going to improve your own chances, even as a purely selfish player. So some main alternatives that I've seen. One thing that I think is really cute and kind of wholesome is when people call each other king, like keep your chin up king or queen or something like that, where they're giving the person a nice title and telling them to keep their chin up. So this would be, instead of talking shit about their appearance, you address them in a nice way. Like you could say, it's all right, bro. Like people make mistakes. Things like that, where you pull them in and you say that you don't need to get down on yourself for the mistake. You just point out, hey, watch out for this thing and keep your chin up, keep it up. And if you can give them some morale boost, or we'll say like an uplifting or encouraging comment, that can really turn the tide for the team, because you're avoiding just descending into the villainy and chaos of talking shit to people, and you're saying, how can I get people in more of a mindset where we can win? Because a really common issue that happens for a team is things start going bad, and then they just attack each other in just degrading ways that don't talk about any strats. And that's when your chances of winning basically drop to zero. What's another way that people degrade each other? I've seen some like weird family stuff. There was someone who, what did they say? They said, your dad doesn't love you. And this, like the appearance-based insult, it's a stranger on the internet. Or your mom does X. Just stuff like this. Which maybe that randomly happens to be true, but that's a really messed up thing to say. If you say it to a person who they know their dad does love them, then it doesn't do anything. So if someone says that to me, it basically just deals zero damage, because my dad is amazing and I know that he loves me. He went to my sport events and my viola concerts and my graduations, and he spent time with us on the weekends and stuff like that and after work. I have a fantastic dad. So to me, this doesn't do anything. But if someone actually had a really rough relationship with their father, this could hurt a lot. It could really hurt, because you're like opening up all these past wounds in the middle of a video game. But a lot of times you can kind of go to the why would someone do this? I think the most likely reason would be that this person doesn't have a good relationship with their father. So they know that that's something that could be bad, and they're kind of stabbing where they were already hurt. So what you can do is try to, instead of taking that comment as like a directed insult at you, you could say, I could see that you've experienced some difficulty there. You don't have to say this to them, but I would think to myself, this probably indicates more of your hardship than mine, and I'm sorry for you. Being sympathetic, yeah. So you don't get defensive. You say, that was a very random insult, which usually says more about you than it does about me. So I don't really know what a mannered alternative to this would be because you also don't know that their relationships with their parents are positive. But yeah, just being not shitty. You don't need to do the inverse of this, I don't think. Okay, what's another one? Social status. Something about being poor, you're poor, or unsuccessful. Bad mic quality. There's a bit of a funny story with this one. I was in a random Dota game, and one of the players on my team starts raging at me, and he's just doing the "you're bad, you're trash garbage," blah, blah, blah. And then he says, "I bet you have a shitty microphone." And I was like, what kind of an insult is that? You're just randomly insulting someone's peripherals for their computer setup. That shouldn't matter, should it? It doesn't really matter if you have like a medium quality mic or a high quality mic. It really doesn't matter. And what I said in reply, because I hadn't been talking at all that game, I said, is this a microphone discussion, gentlemen? Add that little British accent just to give it some pizzazz. And he shut the fuck up for the rest of the game. It was hilarious. But there are a lot of bullies like that, where they're just gonna like randomly jab stuff at you that doesn't really make sense. They're just taking jabs. And if you can sometimes call them out, talk back to them, or say something kind of witty and funny, you can sometimes disjoint a lot of that aggression from them. But yeah, people will degrade you based on your success in life. And then another thing that I guess this points to, you can kind of just do an arrow here. Let's do a nice arrow. What does this point to? I'm going to put a line up here just so we don't get confused that this is a mannered alternative. Let's do this amazing paintbrush. Cool. It's not the straightest line of all time, but it's going places. All right. This points to the troll, we'll say the toxic players' own insecurities. Everyone has insecurities, and a lot of times they're going to be stabbing based on their own insecurities. So they have bad relationships with their family, or they know someone who does, they take stabs based on that. They feel like they're not successful enough in life, they're not rich enough in life, they take stabs at other people for not having that success as well. When it might not even matter to that person. They might be in a pretty stable part of their life. But the way that people degrade each other, it's usually not like a highbrow mastermind kind of a thing. It's more of just a spam of negative stuff that you can say where they're casting a wide net of mean things to say. And hopefully, in their case, they're going to upset someone or get them to quit. Another one that people degrade each other about on the internet would be sex life stuff, usually making fun of people for a lack of sexual stuff, like virgin kind of comments. This one is, I would say, more specifically toxic masculinity most of the time. One of the things that's kind of bundled in with toxic masculinity would be hating on gay people, basically bragging about people's sexual conquest and stuff, or making fun of people who haven't done enough of that. But that's just another kind of random thing where you don't actually know what the sex life of every person in your random competitive game is, but they'll just throw that out there. And then again, this can be connected to their own insecurities, perhaps, or they're just kind of on that toxic masculinity train of this is something that you insult people about. So you can just not do that because you don't actually have information about that anyway. And then again, does this contribute to the match at all? Degrading your teammates does not contribute to the match. What is like an actual, let's look at the real world consequences of talking shit like this. Consequences. Back to that 28 consequences of this BM. Let's just make this go all the way across. Hell yeah. Burp, burp, burp. What happens when you do this? We'll say, first of all, you create a reputation for yourself as an asshole. You might not play with any of these players again, but if you do, oftentimes they remember that because you create the memorable experience of bashing them. And bashing is unpleasant. So if they get matched either against you or on your team, that can be another negative for you moving forward. What are some other consequences for that? You could say emotionally hurting a real person in the world. This one people don't really think about as much because you don't see the person face to face. This is a bit of a theory for me, but I think there is probably some science backing this up. But if we are interacting with people anonymously, we don't have the same level of empathy response in the way that their face changes when they're upset. If you like talk mad shit to somebody and then they go like, and they're like really visibly hurt by that, a lot of times that emotion echoes in you and you're like, oh shit, sorry. Like, oh my gosh, like you feel it to some extent. And that's a big part of why humans are so successful as a group, is they're able to experience an emotion in an individual and then it resonates in the group so that the group cares. If we didn't have empathy and someone was crying and sad, people just wouldn't care. They would be like, or worse, they could laugh or something like that. So that's a real world consequence. And then another like side note on this, we'll say this. Some people are already hurting a lot from other things. You can make the argument until the cows come home that, well, you shouldn't be playing video games if you have real life stuff to manage. Everyone needs leisure time. People should be allowed to spend a couple hours playing video games if they have leisure time. So you can't really make the argument that you should just tough it out. Some people are really carrying a lot of hurt in their life that you don't know about. So you could say something degrading to someone who's having a great day, and maybe it doesn't really get to them too much. You could say something degrading to someone who's had the worst week of their life, and you are basically an evil grain of rice that could tip the scales and cause something bad to happen. So be mindful of that. Think about every time you degrade someone, you're pushing them down. You're making them feel worse about themselves to some extent, usually greater than zero. Sometimes it gets deflected, but a lot of the time you are hurting people. And that's a real person who has to go to work the next day, who has real people around them counting on them, and you just made them feel worse. That's a pretty big deal. And that honestly is one of the main ways that we can change the world to make it a more positive place overall. You don't need to vote for someone to be nice to people. You can be a nicer person yourself. You can be a more compassionate person yourself by just changing the language that you use with other people. This is an area where we actually have a lot of power as individuals. The conversations that we share with people have weight. They have real weight. So even in video games, if you can just take some of your BM and cut that, and then maybe just say something that's going to be a boost to morale, like "we've got this," which is a really easy and simple comment, or "we just need to do this." Like, try to think about win conditions and strategies that could work. Another strategy can be, or another consequence of degrading teammates, is you lower your team's own chance to win. This would be for team games. You're also being off topic with this. If you're just bashing them generally, you're not creating an actionable plan for them. So you're distracting. You're distracting and also lowering morale by degrading your teammates. And then let's just do one for BMing an opponent. if you BM your opponent and then you lose, you look really silly. It's embarrassing. If you BM your opponent and win, that ends up being bad practice. Because if you were facing a stronger opponent, you wouldn't have the time to type out the BM, and you would have fallen behind if you did type out the BM and then lost, which is also embarrassing. So there was a quote from a StarCraft streamer, Destiny, who said, you shouldn't prioritize BM over your macro. It's true. BM is something that takes time, where you could have just injected your bases a little bit more, speaking from a StarCraft context. You could have gone for a little harass play. You could have taken another base. The time that you take to type could have been used doing something else. The exception for this would be for like Dota or League. If your character is dead and you can't do much, sometimes they'll just BM the enemy team during that time frame. And you're not setting yourself back in actions per minute, but it is, again, kind of connecting to this. You can be hurting someone else. And then another thing would be kind of zooming out from this. There is room for banter. So I'm not saying with this discussion that you should never tease people ever. You shouldn't ever joke about someone's mistake or that kind of a thing. If you are in a close friend group and you kind of know each other and you know what's okay and that kind of stuff, fine, sure. That's your own business to joke about with your own friends. What I'm specifically talking about here is interacting with new people on the internet and how degrading them when you don't know them, you don't have that rapport of, I know that it's okay for them to get teased about this because they think it's funny too. You don't know that person. So to say something degrading to them is a net minus for you, for the recipient, and for the team, which is big. So hopefully you found this discussion useful. I'm going to do more of these on different types of toxic situations that people can get into, but it's something that's plagued video games for a long time. This isn't new. Anyone who's played Han or Dota 1 or early StarCraft 2 was a lot more salty than it is now. You've seen plenty of BM, and a lot of times people don't even play a certain game because the community is so toxic and rude, even if the game itself is really interesting and fun to play. So stay safe. If you have any examples or comments on this, feel free to share. And I will see you on the next discussion.